The stars shifted outside the viewport as the Horizon Dawn completed its jump through space. Captain Jake Morrison watched the navigation display with satisfaction as they emerged near their destination. 200 souls aboard this vessel, all hoping to start fresh on a new world far from Earth. The journey had been planned for years, every calculation checked and rechecked. Kepler 442 waited ahead, an uninhabited system that promised water and breathable air and room to build something new. Lieutenant Amy Walsh sat at the navigation console, her fingers moving across the controls as she verified their position. She frowned slightly, her eyes narrowing at the readings. Something felt wrong, though she could not quite identify what. The numbers were correct. The position matched their calculations. But there was an anomaly in the sensor data. A strange quantum signature stretched across space like an invisible line they had just crossed. She turned to Morrison. The captain was a man in his mid-40s, gray touching his temples, with the kind of steady presence that made people trust him. He had commanded cargo vessels before this, nothing glamorous. But he knew how to keep a crew calm and focused. That quality had made him the perfect choice for this mission. Amy reported the anomaly. Morrison listened carefully, then asked what it meant. She admitted she did not know. It could be a natural phenomenon, some quirk of this region of space, or it could be something else. The ship's artificial intelligence, which the crew had nicknamed Darwin, began analyzing the data, searching its databases for any explanation. Hours passed as the Horizon Dawn moved deeper into the system. The crew went about their duties, unaware of the invisible boundary they had crossed. In the habitation sections, families prepared meals, and children did their lessons, and everyone talked about what their new home would look like. There was excitement in the air, the kind that comes from knowing you are part of something historic. Then Lieutenant Peter Grant picked up something on the communications array. Multiple signals, coming from different directions, all converging on their position. He called Morrison back to the bridge immediately. The captain arrived within minutes, Commander Ryan Fletcher right behind him. The two men had known each other for 20 years, had served together on 3 different ships. Fletcher was the kind of officer who anticipated problems before they became crises. The signals resolved into vessels. Not 1 or 2, but dozens. They appeared on the sensors at impossible speeds, moving in coordinated patterns that spoke of military precision. Peter tried to open a channel but received only silence. The ships simply took up positions around the Horizon Dawn, forming a loose perimeter that could tighten at any moment. Morrison felt a chill run down his spine. First contact was supposed to be a moment of wonder, of careful protocol and measured communication. This felt more like an ambush. He ordered the ship to maintain course, but reduce speed. No sudden movements. Nothing that could be interpreted as hostile. Darwin finally provided some analysis. The quantum boundary they had crossed was artificial, a marker of some kind. The patterns suggested technology far beyond human capability, maintained over distances that seemed impossible. Whatever they had crossed, it was intentional. It was a border. More ships arrived. Peter counted over 50 now, and the number kept growing. Different designs, different propulsion systems, all of them clearly more advanced than anything humanity had built. The Horizon Dawn suddenly felt very small and very vulnerable. The first message came through in a burst of incomprehensible language. Darwin began working on translation, comparing patterns and structures against every known linguistic database. It was slow work, building a translation matrix from nothing, but gradually words began to form. The message was not friendly. It spoke of boundaries and violations and consequences. It demanded immediate response and compliance. The tone was unmistakable, even through the rough translation. These aliens, whoever they were not happy about humanity's arrival. Morrison called an emergency meeting of his senior staff. Amy Walsh brought her navigation data, showing the boundary they had crossed. Peter Grant provided what little intelligence they had gathered about the alien vessels. Helen Cruz came from medical, representing the concerns of the civilian colonists who were starting to realize something was wrong. Fletcher stood beside Morrison, ready to offer whatever counsel was needed. They discussed their options in quiet, urgent tones. Turning back seemed sensible, the safe choice that any rational commander would make. But Morrison found himself hesitating. They had come so far, invested so much, and something about the alien message bothered him. It was not a greeting or a warning. It was a command, delivered with the absolute certainty that it would be obeyed. Amy pointed out that if they turned back now, they would be admitting that humanity had no right to be here. Every future human expedition would carry that precedent. They would be establishing from the very first contact that humans could be pushed around, warned off, denied access to space. Fletcher argued the opposite. They were outgunned, outnumbered, dealing with completely unknown technology. Pride was not worth dying for. Getting the colonists home safely had to be the priority. Dr. Cruz spoke up then, her voice calm but firm. She had spent the last hour talking to the colonists, listening to their fears and hopes. Many of them had left Earth because they were tired of being told what they could and could not do. They had crossed light years to build something new. Yes, they were afraid, but they had not come this far to run at the first sign of difficulty. Morrison listened to them all. He thought about humanity's history, about all the times someone had been told to back down or face destruction. Sometimes, backing down had been wise, but other times, standing firm had been the only way to earn respect. Darwin finished the translation of another message. This one was clearer, more direct. Turn back immediately, or be destroyed. The words appeared on the screen in simple English, impossible to misinterpret. The crew looked at Morrison. The captain stood slowly, his decision made. He walked to the communications console and opened a channel to the alien fleet. His voice was steady, showing none of the fear he felt. He told them that humanity meant no harm, that they had not known about any boundary or territory, but he also told them that the Horizon Dawn would not turn back. They would continue to their destination. If the aliens wanted to talk, to explain, to negotiate, humanity was listening. Then he gave the order to continue forward. The bridge fell silent as the Horizon Dawn adjusted course, accelerating toward Kepler 442, toward the alien fleet, toward whatever came next. Outside, in the cold darkness of space, 50 alien warships watched the human vessel approach. On each ship, commanders and crews tried to understand what they were witnessing. Every precedent, every historical record, said the humans should be fleeing. Instead, they were coming closer. And aboard the Horizon Dawn, Captain Jake Morrison sat in his chair and waited to see if humanity would survive its first contact with the stars. The alien warships moved to intercept. 12 vessels broke formation and positioned themselves directly in the path of the Horizon Dawn. They were massive compared to the human ship, their hulls covered in what looked like organic armor, weapon ports glowing with barely contained energy. Commander Ryan Fletcher watched them approach on the tactical display, his jaw tight. He had served in Earth's defense forces before joining the colonial service. He knew what a combat formation looked like, and this was textbook. The aliens were preparing to either destroy them or force them to stop. He reported the analysis to Morrison quietly, not wanting to alarm the rest of the bridge crew. Morrison nodded. He had expected this. The aliens had given them a warning, and now they would enforce it. The only question was how far they would go. The answer came in a burst of plasma fire. The shots streaked past the Horizon Dawn's bow, close enough that the shields flickered from the heat. The entire ship shuddered, and alarm klaxons began wailing. Peter Grant's hands flew across his console, checking for damage. Miraculously, there was none. The aliens had deliberately missed. Amy Walsh was already running calculations. She pulled up the firing trajectories and showed them to Morrison. Every shot had been precisely aimed to come within meters of their hull without actually hitting. It was a warning, a demonstration of power. The message was clear. We could have killed you, but we chose not to. Yet, Dr. Helen Cruz burst onto the bridge. She had been in the habitation section when the shots were fired. The civilians were panicking, she reported. Families were huddled in corridors, children were crying, and everyone wanted to know if they were about to die. She looked at Morrison with barely controlled anger. This was his decision, and now everyone aboard was paying the price. Morrison met her gaze steadily. He understood her fury, even agreed with it on some level. These people had trusted him to keep them safe. But he also knew that safety and dignity sometimes required risk. He asked her to return to the civilians and tell them honestly what was happening. They deserved the truth. Another transmission came through. Peter enhanced the translation, and Darwin displayed it on the main screen. The message was more urgent this time, almost confused in tone. The aliens demanded immediate acknowledgement of their superiority, immediate surrender, immediate compliance with all demands. There was something almost desperate about the repetition, as if they could not understand why the humans were not responding as expected. Fletcher suggested they could transmit a neutral response, something diplomatic that acknowledged the aliens without actually surrendering. It would buy time, maybe open a dialogue. It was the sensible military response to a superior force. Amy disagreed. She had been studying the alien behavior, the way they positioned their ships, the precision of their warning shots. Everything about their actions suggested they were following a script, a procedure they had used many times before. Probably every species they encountered responded the same way, with fear and immediate submission. The aliens expected that pattern to continue. Morrison thought about that. He thought about humanity's own history of empires and conquered peoples. He thought about what happened when you showed weakness to bullies. Sometimes, submission bought survival, but it also bought generations of subjugation. He made his decision. He opened a channel directly to the alien fleet. His voice was calm, almost conversational. He identified himself and his ship. He acknowledged the alien presence and their obvious military superiority. But then he said something that would change everything. He told them that the Horizon Dawn would not surrender, would not turn back. They had no hostile intent toward anyone, but they would continue to their destination. If the aliens chose to destroy them, that was their decision to make. But humanity would not make it easy. Then Morrison did something that Fletcher would later call either brilliant or insane. He ordered Amy to increase speed and set a course directly through the alien formation. If the aliens wanted to stop them, they would have to do it deliberately, with full commitment. Amy hesitated for just a moment, then entered the commands. The Horizon Dawn accelerated, heading straight toward the 12 alien warships that blocked their path. On the lead alien vessel, a creature called Commander Threnox watched in disbelief. He was Vrexian, a species that had dominated this region of space for centuries. His kind were massive insectoid beings, heavily armored, bred for war. They had subjugated dozens of species through simple displays of overwhelming force. No one challenged the Vrexian Empire. No one was that foolish. Yet here came this tiny human ship, accelerating directly at his battle group. Threnox's mandibles clicked in agitation. He checked his tactical systems 3 times, certain there must be some hidden weapon, some trick he was missing. But the scans showed nothing. The human vessel was exactly what it appeared to be. A lightly armed colony ship with minimal defenses. Another voice cut into his command channel. Ambassador Keeleen, of the Matharian Consortium, requested that he hold fire. She wanted to observe what happened next. Threnox was about to refuse, but Keeleen had authority from the Conclave. He had to comply, at least for the moment. Keeleen watched from her own vessel with intense fascination. The Matharians were a species of careful observers, diplomats and scholars rather than warriors. They had joined the Dominion not through conquest but through calculation, offering their services as mediators and advisors. Keeleen had witnessed first contact with 17 different species during her career. All of them had followed predictable patterns. This was not predictable. The humans should be broadcasting desperate pleas by now. Their ship should be turning away. Instead, they were accelerating into danger. It made no tactical sense unless they were suicidal. But their communications showed no signs of death wishes or religious fervor. They simply seemed determined. The distance closed rapidly. On the horizon dawn, Fletcher called out ranges and closing speeds. The alien ships loomed larger on the view screen, weapons charged and ready. The bridge crew sat frozen, barely breathing. In the habitation sections, Dr. Cruz held a young girl who was crying for her mother. Everyone waited for the end. Morrison sat perfectly still in his command chair. His hands did not shake. His voice did not waver. He had committed to this course, and now he would see it through. If these were humanity's final moments, they would face them with dignity. The horizon dawn reached weapons range. Every tactical system screamed warnings. Fletcher gripped his console, ready to try some desperate, evasive maneuver if the aliens opened fire. The alien ships moved, but not to fire. They parted, sliding smoothly to either side, opening a path directly through their formation. The horizon dawn flew through the gap without slowing, emerging on the other side unscathed. For several seconds, no one on the bridge could speak. Peter Grant was the first to find his voice, letting out a breathless laugh of disbelief. Amy Walsh was already analyzing what had happened, trying to understand the aliens' decision. Fletcher looked at Morrison with an expression somewhere between admiration and shock. Morrison let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. They had survived, but he knew this was not over. The aliens had backed down in the moment, but that might only make them more dangerous later. Empires did not like being challenged, especially not by unknown species in unarmed colony ships. He ordered the ship to maintain course but reduce speed slightly. They needed to be ready for whatever came next. Across the Dominion, news of the incident spread rapidly. Every member species received the same tactical recordings, saw the same impossible scene. A species they had never encountered, in a ship with no significant weapons, had flown directly at a Vrexian battle group and been allowed to pass. The political implications were staggering. For 3,000 years, the Dominion had maintained order through a simple principle. Might makes right. The strongest species ruled, the weaker ones obeyed, and everyone knew their place. But the humans had just introduced a new variable. What happens when someone refuses to accept the hierarchy? In council chambers across 47 worlds, debates erupted. Some demanded the humans be destroyed immediately. An example made of them. Others argued for observation, wanting to understand this strange behavior before acting. A few, very quietly, wondered if the humans had discovered something the rest of them had forgotten. The horizon dawn continued toward Kepler 442, now followed by an entire fleet of observers, and Captain Jake Morrison knew that humanity's real test was still ahead. 3 weeks passed as the horizon dawn continued its journey toward Kepler 442. The alien fleet that followed them had grown from dozens to hundreds of ships. They maintained a constant distance, never approaching too close, but never leaving. It was like being shadowed by a pack of predators, waiting to see if their prey would stumble. Captain Jake Morrison established a routine that he hoped would project calm confidence. Every morning at the same time, Lieutenant Peter Grant transmitted the same message to the alien fleet. It was simple and polite. Good morning. The horizon dawn continues peaceful passage to our destination. We remain open to diplomatic contact. The responses varied wildly. Some days brought threats. Some days brought silence. Some days brought questions. The questions came mostly from one source. Ambassador Keeleen, of the Metherians, had become humanity's most frequent contact. Unlike the Vrexian commanders who simply demanded submission, Keeleen seemed genuinely curious about these strange newcomers. She asked about human history, about their reasons for leaving Earth, about their social structures and beliefs. Dr. Helen Cruz took over most of these communications. Morrison had recognized early that Cruz had a gift for explanation, for making complex ideas accessible without being condescending. She also understood that every answer they gave was being recorded, analyzed, and reported back to the alien leadership. The conversations were friendly on the surface, but they were also intelligence-gathering operations from both sides. One conversation stood out. Keeleen asked the question that had apparently been puzzling the entire Dominion. Why had the humans not run when faced with overwhelming force? Every tactical analysis said they should have fled or surrendered immediately. Their ship was minimally armed, incapable of defending against even a single alien warship. Yet they had flown directly at a battle group. The behavior made no sense to species raised in the Dominion's hierarchy. Cruz considered her answer carefully. She explained that running would have marked humanity as prey, as victims. They had made a mistake by crossing the boundary. Yes. But that mistake did not make them inferior. They had chosen to insist on being treated as equals rather than accepting treatment as lesser beings. Keeleen responded with what sounded like genuine confusion. The humans were not equals, she pointed out. The Dominion had technology that seemed magical by human standards. They had weapons that could destroy worlds. They had fleets, numbering in the thousands. How could the humans claim equality when the power imbalance was so obvious? Cruz's answer would be quoted in alien diplomatic circles for years afterward. She said that equality was not about power. It was about dignity. The aliens could kill humanity, could destroy Earth itself, but they could not make humans bow. Dignity was not something that could be taken by force. It could only be surrendered, and humanity chose not to surrender it. The conversation was broadcast across the Dominion. For many species who had long ago accepted their place in the hierarchy, it was a strange and unsettling idea. They had measured their worth by their strength, their value by their position in the pecking order. The notion that dignity existed independent of power was almost alien to cultures built on conquest. Meanwhile, on the Vrexian homeworld, Commander Threnox faced severe criticism. He had allowed the humans to pass. He had blinked first. In Vrexian culture, this was unforgivable weakness. His rivals used the incident to undermine his authority, questioning whether he was fit for command. Threnox felt his position slipping and knew he needed to restore his reputation. He proposed a test to the conclave. The humans would reach Kepler 442 soon. When they arrived, a Dominion fleet would already be there, claiming the system. The humans would have to either accept Dominion sovereignty over their destination or initiate conflict. Either way, the situation would be resolved. The conclave approved his proposal. On the Horizon Dawn, Amy Walsh detected the change when they were still 2 days from Kepler 442. Long-range sensors showed a massive fleet already in orbit around the planet. Hundreds of ships, far more than the force that had been shadowing them. She reported to Morrison immediately. The captain called his senior staff together. They gathered in the small conference room that doubled as Morrison's office. Amy showed them the tactical data. Ryan Fletcher provided the military assessment. Overwhelming force designed to present an impossible choice. Peter Grant noted the symbolism of the aliens, claiming humanity's destination before they arrived. The discussion was tense. Amy argued for negotiation. They could acknowledge the alien presence and propose some kind of joint arrangement. Peter thought they should land anyway. The aliens had not physically occupied the planet, just its orbit. Let them try to stop a landing craft. Dr. Cruz wanted to reach out to the more moderate Dominion members, like Keeleen. Fletcher, as always, provided the cold tactical truth. But backing down now, after coming so far, would establish a precedent that would haunt humanity for generations. Every future human mission would be treated as supplicants, begging for permission. Morrison listened to them all. These people had become more than his crew over the weeks of tension and uncertainty. They had become representatives of humanity's first impression on the galaxy. Every decision they made would echo forward through time. He made his choice. They would land. They would establish their colony on Kepler 442 as planned. They would maintain open communications and avoid any aggressive action. But they would not ask permission, and they would not turn back. If the Dominion wanted to start a war over principle, that would be their choice. The Horizon Dawn began its approach to Kepler 442. The planet was beautiful from orbit, with blue oceans and green continents, and white clouds swirling in familiar patterns. It looked enough like Earth to make some of the colonists cry. After so long in space, after so much uncertainty, here was the home they had dreamed of. The alien fleet did not move to intercept, but every weapon system locked onto the descending colony ship. Targeting lasers painted the Horizon Dawn's hull. Aboard the alien vessels, crews waited for orders to fire. Morrison sat in the command chair, his hands steady on the armrests. Beside him, Fletcher monitored the tactical situation. Amy flew the ship with careful precision, choosing a landing site in a valley near water and arable land. Peter kept communication channels open, broadcasting their peaceful intentions in every language Darwin could manage. The descent seemed to take forever. Every second stretched out as they waited for the killing blow. The colonists in the habitation sections were silent now, past fear and into a kind of numb acceptance. Doctor, R. Anhevikan. Doctor. Cruz moved among them, offering what comfort she could, though she had no reassurances to give. The Horizon Dawn touched down on solid ground. The engines powered down. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Peter received a transmission request. It was Ambassador Keeleen, asking permission to visit the surface. Morrison looked at Fletcher, who shrugged. What did they have to lose at this point? Morrison granted permission. Keeleen's shuttle landed an hour later. She emerged with an escort of guards and translators, but no obvious weapons. Morrison met her personally, along with Dr. Cruz and Karen Mitchell, a woman the colonists had elected as their civilian representative. Morrison extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting. Keeleen studied the hand for a moment, then reached out with her own appendage to mirror the gesture. It was the first physical contact between humans and aliens, witnessed by billions across the Dominion. Morrison welcomed her to New Haven, the name the colonists had chosen for their settlement. He thanked her for agreeing to meet. Keeleen looked around at the humans unloading equipment, families setting up temporary shelters, children already exploring their new home despite everything. She saw something in their faces that troubled her, though she could not quite name it. It was not fear. It was not aggression. It was something else entirely. They walked through the growing colony. Morrison and Cruz and Mitchell showed Keeleen everything openly. The building sites where homes would stand. The agricultural plots already being prepared. The school area where children would learn. There was no attempt to hide or deceive. This was what humans did. When they found a new home, they built, they planted, they planned for the future. Keeleen found herself unexpectedly moved. Her species, the Matharians, had not colonized a new world in centuries. They lived on their ancient homeworld and a handful of stations, their population stable and controlled. Growth was not something they thought about anymore. But these humans carried growth in their very nature. They sat in a partially constructed building that would become the colony's meeting hall. Karen Mitchell, practical and direct, asked the question everyone needed answered. Was there room in the Dominion for one more species just trying to make a home? Keeleen explained how the Dominion worked. Species had to apply for membership. They had to prove their worth through military strength or technological achievement. They had to accept the existing hierarchy and their place within it. The rules had maintained order for 3,000 years. Morrison responded carefully. Humanity had no interest in domination, no desire to conquer, but they also would not accept subjugation. If the Dominion wanted diplomatic relations, treaties, clearly defined boundaries, humans would gladly engage. Earth's government would need to be involved eventually, but they could start the process here and now. Over the next several days, an unofficial dialogue developed. Keeleen stayed in New Haven, observing the humans as they worked. She reported back to the conclave, but her reports had changed in tone. She was no longer describing a potential threat. She was describing a culture, a people, a way of being that the Dominion had not encountered before. Then Amy Walsh made a discovery that changed everything. She had been analyzing the quantum boundary they had crossed, comparing it to similar phenomena in human physics databases. She brought her findings to Morrison and asked if Keeleen could be present. Amy explained that the boundary was not a territorial marker. It was a barrier, designed with specific quantum properties that should have prevented travel from outside to inside. It was not meant to mark territory. It was meant to keep something out, or perhaps to keep the Dominion species inside. The revelation hung in the air. Keeleen stared at the data, her expression unreadable. Morrison waited for her response. Finally, Keeleen spoke. The barrier was not built to show strength. It was built from fear. The Dominion's founders had created it not to claim territory, but to hide from whatever existed beyond. And humanity had walked through it simply because they did not know to be afraid. Ambassador Keeleen faced a choice that would define her career and possibly her species' future. She held information that could unravel 3,000 years of carefully maintained social order, the truth about the barrier, about the fear at the foundation of the Dominion, was dangerous knowledge. She could suppress it, file the report quietly where it would be buried by bureaucracy. Or she could speak honestly to the conclave. She chose truth. The decision surprised even her. Perhaps she had spent too much time among the humans, absorbing their strange commitment to transparency. Or perhaps she was simply tired of the lies that held the Dominion together. Either way, she transmitted her full findings to every member of the conclave simultaneously, making suppression impossible. The reaction was immediate and chaotic. Some species representatives responded with fear, demanding to know what threats existed beyond the barrier. Others reacted with fury at being deceived for millennia. The younger generations and subjugated species reacted with hope if the barrier was not absolute. If humans could cross it unknowingly, then perhaps everything they had been taught about the Dominion's superiority was equally fragile. The conclave descended into bitter argument. Commander Thrennox saw his opportunity. He framed Keeleen as a traitor who had been corrupted by the humans. He called for her arrest and for immediate military action against New Haven. The humans, he argued, represented an existential threat, not through their weapons, but through their ideas. Several conclave members supported him. The Dominion had maintained stability through accepted hierarchy and controlled information. Allowing one species to question the foundations threatened everyone's position. Better to eliminate the problem now, decisively, and restore the old order. But others hesitated. The humans had done nothing objectively wrong. They had crossed a boundary they did not know existed, refused to submit to threats, and settled on an unclaimed planet. If the Dominion destroyed them for that, what did it say about the Dominion's actual values? Moreover, countless species within the Dominion were watching. Heavy-handed suppression might backfire. The debate raged for days. In New Haven, the colonists continued building their settlement, aware of the turmoil in orbit, but unable to influence it. They worked with quiet determination, putting up structures and planting crops, and establishing the routines of daily life. If these were their last days, they would spend them building, rather than cowering. Dr. Helen Cruz organized the medical facilities with help from human and Matherian knowledge. Keeleen had provided biological databases that helped Cruz understand potential health issues in this new environment. In return, Cruz shared human medical techniques that fascinated the Matherian scientists. Neither woman spoke about the political crisis hanging over them. They focused on the practical work of keeping people alive. Karen Mitchell established a civil government structure. She held elections for a colony council, set up committees for resource management, and dispute resolution, and created a framework for fair decision-making. It seemed almost absurd to worry about governance when they might be destroyed at any moment. But Mitchell argued that civilization was not something you waited to build until it was safe. Civilization was how you made safety possible. Lieutenant Amy Walsh spent her time studying the barrier data. She worked with Peter Grant to compile everything they had learned about Dominion technology and culture. If humanity survived, this information would be invaluable. If they did not, she wanted it transmitted to Earth as a warning. Commander Ryan Fletcher organized the colony's limited defenses. They had mining equipment that could be repurposed, some small arms for dealing with potential wildlife, and the Horizon Dawn's minimal weapons systems. Against a Dominion fleet, it was laughably inadequate, but Fletcher believed in the value of being ready, even when readiness seemed pointless. Captain Jake Morrison walked through New Haven each day, talking with colonists and checking on progress. People looked to him for reassurance he could not honestly give. He settled for presence, for being visible and steady. Leadership, he had learned, was often about simply refusing to panic when everyone else wanted to. On the 10th day after landing, everything changed. The conclave formally demanded that Keeleen return immediately to face judgment. Commander Threnox, emboldened by political support, mobilized a significant portion of the Vrexian fleet. Over 500 ships began moving toward Kepler 442. The message was clear. The debate was over. Force would decide the issue. Morrison received a transmission from Earth. The governments there had finally learned of the situation through the Horizon Dawn's regular reports. Admiral Kevin Shaw, speaking for Earth's Unified Defense Forces, delivered a message that humanity was coming. 30 warships, representing Earth's entire combat-ready fleet, would arrive in 16 days. Morrison appreciated the solidarity, but he understood the mathematics. 30 human ships against thousands of Dominion vessels. Earth was showing support, not salvation. Still, it mattered. Humanity was standing together, even across impossible distances. He made a decision that surprised everyone. He invited Commander Threnox to land in New Haven for direct negotiations. The transmission went out on open channels, visible to the entire Dominion. Morrison offered safe passage and honest dialogue. He asked Threnox to see what he was threatening to destroy before making his final decision. Threnox, interpreting the invitation as a sign of weakness, accepted immediately. He would go to the surface, accept the humans' surrender, and resolve this situation before Earth's fleet arrived. His reputation would be restored through this final, decisive action. He landed with 100 guards, expecting Morrison to meet him with some formal capitulation. Instead, Morrison offered him a tour of New Haven. The captain's tone was simple and direct. He wanted Threnox to understand what destroying the colony would actually mean. They walked through the settlement. Threnox saw the school, where human children learned mathematics and literature, alongside information about alien cultures. The colonists had started compiling everything they could learn about their new neighbors, teaching it to the next generation. There was no hatred here. No preparation for revenge. Just curiosity about the universe. They passed the medical facility where Dr. Cruz worked. She was treating a child who had fallen during play, the kind of minor injury that happened everywhere children lived. The child's mother held her daughter and thanked Cruz in a language Threnox's translator could barely parse. But gratitude needed no translation. They saw the memorial wall where colonists had written messages, hopes for peaceful coexistence, dreams of a future where humans and aliens work together, fears honestly expressed and not hidden. One message read, "We came in peace, and hope we can stay that way." Karen Mitchell confronted Threnox directly. She asked if he wanted them gone because they challenged his way of doing things. She acknowledged that change was frightening, but she asked him to look at what they were actually building. Was it really worth destroying? Threnox remained unmoved. He spoke of the Dominion's 3,000 years of order. That stability was worth protecting, even if it required harsh measures. The alternative was chaos, every species scrambling for advantage, the kind of disorder that had existed before the Dominion brought structure. Morrison challenged that assertion. He asked what kind of order was built on fear and maintained through threat of violence. That was not order, he argued. That was just tyranny moving slowly enough that people got used to it. Threnox demanded to know what humans offered instead. Chaos and competition and endless conflict. That was what existed before the Dominion. Morrison explained the human concept of partnership. Different species cooperating without requiring domination. Strength through diversity rather than uniformity. Exploration and growth valued more than territory and control. It was not a perfect system. Humans had made countless mistakes, but it allowed for change without requiring catastrophe. The debate was interrupted by Peter Grant. The conclave had reached a decision and was broadcasting it across the Dominion. Everyone stopped to listen. Each species representative spoke. Some argued for expulsion or military action. They wanted tradition, maintained at any cost, but others, inspired by what they had witnessed, argued for something unprecedented. They spoke of what the humans had demonstrated. Courage without arrogance. Determination without aggression. The possibility of dignity without domination. Ambassador Keeleen spoke last. She acknowledged everything the humans had done wrong. They had crossed the boundary. They had entered without permission. They had refused to submit. But she argued that these were not crimes. They were reminders of what the Dominion had lost. The courage to encounter the unknown without defaulting to fear. The willingness to stand on principle even when outmatched. The basic assertion that existence did not require permission from the powerful. Her final words resonated across millions of worlds. She said that the humans did not flinch, not because they were warriors seeking glory, but because they believed in their right to exist on their own terms. How many species in the Dominion had forgotten that right? How many worlds had been conquered because fear was easier than standing firm? The vote was recorded species by species. Morrison watched the results come in, hardly daring to breathe. Fletcher stood beside him, equally tense. Around them, the colonists gathered, waiting to learn their fate. The final tally was close, far closer than anyone expected. But when all votes were counted, humanity was granted provisional status, not as Dominion members, not as subjects, but as recognized neighbors. New Haven could remain. Human ships could travel through Dominion space. Formal diplomatic relations would be established with Earth. It was not everything humanity might have hoped for. There would be restrictions, negotiations, probably conflicts ahead. But it was recognition. It was legitimacy. It was a beginning. Commander Threnox stood in the middle of New Haven, listening to the verdict. His expression was unreadable through his alien features. Then, in a decision that surprised even himself, he requested permission to remain as the Dominion's first resident observer. He wanted to understand these humans better, to see if their way actually worked. Morrison, after a moment's consideration, agreed. If humans and aliens were going to coexist, they needed to understand each other. Threnox could stay. That night, the colonists of New Haven celebrated. Not wildly, but with quiet relief and cautious joy. They had survived. They had earned their place. And somehow, impossibly, they had changed the galaxy just by refusing to look away. 6 months after the Conclave's decision, Admiral Kevin Shaw finally arrived with Earth's fleet. The 30 warships emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, weapons ready and shields active. Shaw had expected to find either a battle in progress or a destroyed colony. Instead, he found something that bewildered him completely. New Haven had grown into a proper town. Over 300 structures now dotted the valley, with more under construction every day. Fields of crops stretched across the fertile soil. A spaceport was taking shape where the Horizon Dawn had originally landed, and moving among the human colonists were aliens. Representatives from a dozen different Dominion species, who had come to observe or trade, or simply learn about these strange newcomers. Shaw's tactical officer reported defensive installations around the colony, but they were minimal, certainly nothing that could withstand a serious attack. The real defense seemed to be political rather than military. The colony existed because the Dominion had chosen to allow it, and because destroying it would now cause more problems than it solved. Morrison met Shaw's shuttle personally. The admiral was a career military officer, stern and precise, who had expected to either mount a rescue or avenge a massacre. Finding Morrison alive and the colony thriving left him uncertain how to proceed. He asked for a full briefing immediately. They sat in the meeting hall, now completed and furnished. Morrison explained everything that had happened since the Horizon Dawn crossed the barrier. Shaw listened, with growing disbelief. His military mind struggled to accept that Morrison had survived through sheer audacity and diplomatic improvisation rather than tactical planning. Shaw finally asked the obvious question. Morrison had risked 200 civilian lives on a gamble that the aliens would back down. What if he had been wrong? Morrison's answer was honest. Then they would have died. But living as subjects, constantly reminded of their inferior status, seemed worse than the risk of death. At least they had chosen their fate rather than having it imposed on them. The admiral was not entirely satisfied with that answer, but he could not argue with the results. Humanity had established itself in the galactic community through sheer determination. Now came the harder work of maintaining that position. Over the following weeks, formal diplomatic structures took shape. Earth sent proper ambassadors to replace Morrison's improvised leadership. The Dominion assigned official representatives to New Haven. Treaty negotiations began, complex and often frustrating, but genuine. Dr. Helen Cruz found herself appointed as humanity's chief medical liaison. She worked with alien scientists to develop shared health protocols. The biological diversity of the Dominion meant that diseases rarely crossed species barriers. But accidents and injuries could happen to anyone. Having medical staff who understood multiple species could save lives. She also continued her work with the colonists. Several babies had been born since landing, the first humans native to a world beyond Earth. Cruz delivered them with Metherian medical equipment that made the process safer than it would have been otherwise. The alien technology was a gift from Ambassador Keeleen, who had returned to New Haven after her vindication by the Conclave. Keeleen had become an unlikely friend to many humans. She spent her evenings in the colony's common areas, talking with anyone who would sit with her. She learned about human music and humor and the thousand small things that made human culture unique. In return, she taught humans about the Dominion's history, its complexity, its gradual transformation from defensive alliance to rigid hierarchy. One night, sitting with Morrison and Cruz, she admitted something that surprised them both. She was afraid, not of humans, but of what humans represented. Change. The possibility that everything her species believed about strength and survival might be wrong. She had built her entire career on understanding the Dominion's rules and using them skillfully. Now those rules were being questioned. Morrison asked what she would do if the Dominion collapsed entirely. Keeleen laughed, a sound that her translator rendered as musical chimes. The Dominion would not collapse, she assured him. Institutions that old had immense inertia. But it might evolve, might become something better, or at least something different. Lieutenant Amy Walsh continued her scientific work, now with access to Dominion databases. She studied their barrier technology and faster-than-light drives. Human physicists on Earth worked from her transmitted data, already developing improved propulsion systems. The gap between human and alien technology was shrinking rapidly. She also studied the quantum barrier itself more thoroughly. Her findings confirmed the initial analysis. It was designed to prevent detection and passage from outside, built by the Dominion's founders who had been fleeing something. But the records of what they were fleeing had been lost or deliberately erased. The Dominion's foundation rested on forgotten fears. Some species within the Dominion wanted those records found. Others wanted them to stay lost. The debate created new political factions, new alliances, and rivalries. The rigid hierarchy that had existed for millennia was developing cracks. Commander Ryan Fletcher took charge of training New Haven's security forces. They remained deliberately minimal, focused on emergency response rather than military capability. But Fletcher insisted they be competent at their limited role. When a minor earthquake damaged several buildings, his team's rapid response saved lives. When a local animal attacked some exploring children, trained personnel handled it professionally. Fletcher also worked closely with Commander Thrennox, who had indeed remained in New Haven. The relationship was complicated. Thrennox still believed in the Dominion's fundamental principles, but he could not deny what he observed. The humans built their society on cooperation and consent rather than domination. And it worked. Not perfectly, people still argued and competed and occasionally fought. But it worked, without requiring the kind of force the Dominion considered essential. Thrennox began writing reports that were widely read throughout the Vrexian Empire. He described human governance structures, their methods of conflict resolution, their approach to resource distribution. Some Vrexians dismissed his observations as the foolish musings of someone corrupted by alien contact. Others found them genuinely thought-provoking. Lieutenant Peter Grant became humanity's primary contact for what amounted to interstellar traffic control. More human ships were coming, both from Earth and from other human colonies. The Dominion wanted them tracked and monitored. Peter developed protocols that satisfied both security concerns and human sovereignty. It was tedious work, but essential for maintaining the fragile peace. He also maintained the communications network between New Haven and Earth. The time lag made real-time conversation impossible, but regular updates kept both parties informed. Earth's governments were still adjusting to the new reality. Humanity was no longer alone, and their neighbors were far more advanced and potentially dangerous. Karen Mitchell continued as New Haven's civilian administrator. She expanded the colony council, established fair taxation systems, and handled the disputes that inevitably arose when people lived together. She also negotiated with alien visitors who wanted to establish trade relationships. New Haven was becoming a hub of cultural exchange, not by design, but by necessity. She worked with a Dominion economist named Velir, a species resembling scaled reptiles with multiple eyes. Velir found human economic systems fascinatingly chaotic. Humans allowed competition and failure, which seemed inefficient. But they also innovated constantly, which the Dominion's controlled systems discouraged. Velir was writing a treatise comparing the systems, and Mitchell helped by explaining human thinking. Admiral Shaw remained in orbit with Earth's fleet. His orders were to protect New Haven and observe the Dominion. He did not trust the aliens, regardless of treaties, but as weeks turned to months, even he had to admit that direct conflict seemed unlikely. The real challenges were diplomatic and economic rather than military. He did insist on regular combat readiness drills. If hostilities erupted, his fleet needed to respond immediately. Morrison understood the necessity, but worried about the message it sent. The colonists had survived by projecting confidence rather than threat. Too much military presence might undermine that carefully constructed image. They compromised. Shaw's fleet maintained readiness, but stayed in high orbit, visible, but not aggressive. The Dominion fleet in the system did the same. Both sides watched each other while pretending not to. Captain Jake Morrison found himself with an unexpected role. He was no longer commanding the Horizon Dawn, which had been converted into permanent housing and administrative offices. Instead, he served as an unofficial advisor to everyone: the colonists who remembered his leadership, the Earth diplomats who valued his experience, the aliens who saw him as the human who first challenged the Dominion. He walked through New Haven often, watching it grow. Children played in streets that had not existed 6 months ago. Families ate meals in homes they had built themselves. Humans and aliens worked together on construction projects, their different strengths complementing each other. It was not perfect. Misunderstandings happened. Cultural differences caused friction. But people were trying. One afternoon, Morrison stood with Keeleen overlooking the colony from a small hill. The Mytharian ambassador had brought a bottle of something that she claimed was similar to wine. It was not, but Morrison appreciated the gesture. They drank together in comfortable silence. Keeleen finally spoke. She asked what Morrison thought would happen now. Would humanity integrate into the Dominion? Would they challenge it further? Would they simply coexist in uncomfortable proximity? Morrison admitted he did not know. Humanity had stumbled into something far larger than they understood. They had survived the first contact, through luck as much as courage. The future remained deeply uncertain, but he also pointed out what they had already achieved. New Haven existed. Earth knew the galaxy was not empty. Humans and aliens were talking, rather than fighting. That was more than he had dared hope for when they first crossed the barrier. Keeleen agreed. She raised her glass in a gesture she had learned from humans. To the future, she said. Whatever it brings. Morrison raised his own glass. To the future. Below them, New Haven continued growing. In orbit, human and alien ships maintained their watchful positions. Across the Dominion, species debated what humanity's arrival meant for the old order. On Earth, millions looked up at the stars with new understanding. The barrier that had kept the Dominion isolated still existed, but it no longer seemed quite so absolute. Humanity had crossed it once unknowingly. Now they knew it was there. Knew what lay beyond, and knew they could travel through it. That knowledge changed everything. Other Dominion species watched and wondered. If humans could challenge the hierarchy and survive, perhaps they could too. The rigid structures that had maintained order for 3,000 years were beginning to crack. Not catastrophically, but undeniably. Change came to the galaxy slowly, as it always did. But it came, and at the center of that change, in a small colony, on a distant world, humans and aliens learned to live together. They did not flinch from the challenge. They faced it directly, with all the courage and foolishness and determination that characterized humanity at its best. The story of first contact was just beginning. But already, it was clear that the galaxy would never be quite the same. Humanity had arrived, not as conquerors or subjects, but as equals who insisted on being treated with dignity. And somehow, impossibly, the rest of the galaxy was beginning to accept that claim. In the end, perhaps that was humanity's real gift to the stars. Not superior technology or military might, but the simple, stubborn insistence that everyone deserves respect. That dignity cannot be taken, only surrendered. And that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to bow when everyone expects you to. The Horizon Dawn's journey had ended, but humanity's journey among the stars had only just begun.